there's been this debate, I think, for a while about how legitimate of an outlaw she was, and if there was this was just a myth about her that had been exaggerated, or if she was really this sort of gunslinger and bandit who could live up to the legend. And I was curious about this too, and doing the research. Not only did she live up to the hype, I think she exceeded it. And she definitely was a legitimate bandit. She started out as kind of a sidekick to these outlaws, and she knew Jesse James, she knew Cole Younger, she knew Jim Reed, that was her first husband, and she started out as a bit of a sidekick, a tag along. But then eventually, particularly after the death of her husband Jim Reed, started to do something on her own. And this culminated when she, after that, married into the Cherokee Nation through her relationship with her, I guess technically third husband, Sam Starr, kind of married into this powerful Cherokee warlord crime family who was known in the area, and effectively started her own little gang. She was, I don't know if you'd say the Don or the Capo or what, of her own kind of little Cherokee mafia gang that she ran. And she was acknowledged as such. And they, the local authorities, both tribal authorities and the U.S. Marshals, so the federal government, put a lot of resources into trying to arrest her, and they did succeed once. She was arrested three times on charges, twice for horse theft, basically, and once for armed robbery. And she did get busted. She did actually. She couldn't beat the charges for one of the horse theft charges, and she went to prison in Detroit for a year. And so yeah, they were definitely after her. She was definitely a legitimate criminal. There was a big manhunt, in fact, where she was fleeing to the Osage Nation with her husband, and the U.S. Marshals, chased her down and caught her right on the border. And she put up a fight. When they captured her, she had pistols on her, multiple pistols, and kind of had to wrestle her to the ground and whatnot. And so she was definitely a legitimate criminal. And when you read the notes from the courthouse at that time, the court records, and when you read the newspaper articles that journalists were in the courtroom writing about her, it was acknowledged. She was known, and she was something of a curiosity. The courthouse was packed with spectators who wanted to see this outlaw queen, and she was kind of acknowledged as an outlaw queen even at the time. So she was definitely legit, and the way she sort of incorporated and ingratiated herself with the Cherokee Nation was pretty brilliant too. I'm just all this stuff she was doing was exceptional, and at that time to do it as a woman, I think was even more exceptional. So she really was just this once in a nation's history type figure, this really exceptional figure who did some incredible things, rising to a position of power and respect and influence at a time when, like I said, it would have been hard for anyone. And she did it at that time as a woman when women weren't allowed to vote, weren't allowed to open bank accounts, were kind of expected at very specific roles. And she just couldn't be bothered. She didn't care less. She was kind of this badass character, just did what she wanted. I think the thing I find most interesting about that is the why. And she didn't come from a poor or hard up or hard scrabble background per se. Her family was fairly prosperous on this sort of frontier economy. Her father was a successful horse breeder and tavern owner, and he was sort of a pillar of the community, a town father. And her mother was a bit of a Southern belle to an extent. She was educated and had these social graces, and they tried to educate Belle as well. Sent her to school, taught her Greek and Latin and even French, I think, taught her to play the piano. And she very easily could have taken this sort of, just a simple path. She could have married a wealthy rancher or a plantation owner or something like that, and just had, been this sort of ornamental character hosting fancy dinners and laughing at her husband's jokes and fitting into the role that society expected of her, and could have had a pretty easy, cushy life. And she flatly rejected them. She wanted none of it. And I think you could argue the sort of damage that the Civil War did to her family and her society was partly to blame. But really, I think she chose this outlaw path because it afforded her the kind of freedom and liberty and opportunities for self-determination and self-realization that legally she couldn't have. It was almost impossible for her to start a business or own property or engage in commerce or become a leader of anything at that time as a woman. But as an outlaw, there are no rules, and I think that's what she loved. That for her, that was the beauty of the way of the outlaw of organized crime, was she had a freedom that she didn't have in law-abiding life. So it's kind of ironic that to feel free and equal, she had to break the law rather than following it. And one thing I also find I find quite interesting too is at the end of the day, what she actually accomplished. She was a prolific horse thief and her, collected these horses and traded them and sold them, which after stealing them, which is what her father did legally. He was a horse breeder. And her ranch served as this sort of like hideout and protection racket for outlaws on the run. So she made a sizable part of her income for letting these outlaws, these fugitives, come and hide out at her ranch. And she kind of hosted them. So effectively, she was in the hospitality industry too. So what's kind of cool is she basically just followed in her father's footsteps. But the only way she could do that as a woman at that time was by breaking the law. There was no way she could have kind of gotten the funds and the agency to run her own hotel or to start her own big horse breeding farm. To do that, to do the same thing that her family did, to follow in the family tradition, she essentially had to become an outlaw.